Have you ever noticed how a lot of words in French sound pretty similar to the ones we find here in English? Maybe you've even heard similar sounding words in Spanish, Italian, German, Swiss, Ukrainian, Austrian, Polish, Belgian, Dutch, Russian, Serbian, Romanian, Greek, Bulgarian, Swedish, Moldovan, Danish, Farsi, or Hindi. The list goes on, and it's a long one. It may seem strange, but almost every language from Iceland to India shares the same common ancestor, Proto Indo-European, or P.I.E. for short. Gaston Dorren's non-fictional novel LINGO extrapolates upon this idea. It takes readers on a whirlwind tour of 60 different European languages and dialects, sharing quirky moments from their histories and exploring their commonalities and differences. From the massive consonant clusters of Georgian to the horrendous spelling system of English, this book has it all. When it comes to comprehension, it doesn't even take much prior knowledge of linguistics to be able to understand this book, if any at all. It uses very little fancy linguistic vocabulary and omits the use of the International Phonetic Alphabet, the standardized system for phonetically transcribing spoken language. However, I do think this book is definitely aimed at an audience that has a particular interest in linguistics and/or history. Assuming you find the book interesting, it's not a difficult read at all. It really does deal with a large array of topics, such as politics, psychology, history, geography, and of course, linguistics, so most readers should be able to find their niche. Today I will be teaching you about Proto Indo-European, the origin of the most spoken linguistic family in the world, being, as the name suggests, the Indo-European languages. Approximately 42% of the world's population speaks an Indo-European language as a first language. That's a staggering 3.2 billion humans, around 86 times the population of Canada. Every language in Europe has descended from Proto-Indo-European, aside from a very small handful. However, Dorren states that this is not a perfect name. The word proto, first, implies that no language preceded it, which is not the case, while the label Indo-European suggests a language that is confined to India and Europe. Finnish, Estonian, and Hungarian come from the Finno-Ugric family, along with the Sami languages of Scandinavia and a few languages around the Ural mountain range in Russia. The Turkic languages, Turkish, Azerbaijani, Gagauz, Tatar, Bashkir, Crimean Tatar, and Chuvash are all spoken in Eurasia, the Balkans, and southern Russia. Some of these may not even be considered European, but definitions are fuzzy when it comes to Europe borders, so I'll acknowledge them anyway. There are also a few oddballs here and there. Maltese is a Semitic language, like Arabic and Hebrew. It's spoken in, you guessed it, Malta. Kalmyk is a Mongolic language spoken in Kalmykia, Russia. It's also spoken in Siberia now, because the Kalmyks got deported by the USSR. Finally, there are the North Caucasian languages, like Abkhaz, and South Caucasian languages, like Georgian. Their names may be a bit misleading, as they aren't related in the slightest. I feel like I'm forgetting something. Oh, right. Basque. Basque is kinda weird. It's what's known as a language isolate, meaning it doesn't belong to any known language family. It's spoken in Basque Country, around the north coast of Spain. I've been there myself, and it's noticeably different from the languages around it. The sounds they use are relatively normal for the region, nothing too exotic. Their grammar, however, is very odd. Now that you know which languages are in and which are out, it's time for me to show you how linguists determine the pronunciation of Proto-Indo-European words using modern-day Indo-European vocabulary. Let's start with something simple, the word you. Now, let's think for a moment and take all translations that we know of into consideration. I'll just use what I can think of off the top of my head. So we have English you, French tu, Spanish tu, Punjabi tusim, Latin tu, Italian tu, and Swedish du. There are plenty more, but that's what immediately came to mind. Now, I don't know about you, but I think I'm seeing a pattern here. Of the 7 examples, 4 of them are virtually identical. They sound something like tu. Swedish is super close, it just changes that ta to a da. Punjabi even starts with a ta sound. But English? Sure, Swedish changed the ta and swapped it out for a da, but those are extremely similar sounds. Ta and ya, on the other hand, that doesn't make much sense. See, there's something called Grimm's Law, and it applies to all Germanic languages. Keep in mind, of the examples I listed, English and Swedish are the only 2 Germanic languages. Grimm's Law identifies the consonant changes in Germanic languages that take place over time. For example, ta shifts to th, and that's exactly what happened. The Proto-Germanic word for you is thu. Now is when Werner's law comes into action. Werner's law expands upon Grimm's law. It states that, over time, the will either become da or the. Now Swedish makes sense. Tu becomes thu becomes du. But what about English? Well, as it turns out, English thou is the real descendant we're looking for. Remember, ta becomes the becomes da or the. In the case of English, it became the in thou. The word you actually comes from the P.I.E. word you, which is plural, not singular. English and its nonsense aside, I think we can safely conclude that the Proto Indo-European word for English you, at least in the singular sense, is something along the lines of tu. It seems that all evidence we have at our disposal backs up this claim. Okay, now, after that mess, you might be thinking, man, English is kinda weird. And you'd be right. When it comes to vocabulary, English and the other Germanic languages have many strange exceptions and shifts that make it hard to understand other Indo-European languages. But that's not the worst part, oh no. It's English's spelling system that takes the cake. Take a look at the following text from the book. If GH stands for P, as in hiccup, if OUGH stands for O, as in dough, if PHTH stands for ta, as in Tisus, if EIGH stands for A, as in neighbor, if TTE stands for T, as in gazette, if EAU stands for O, as in plateau, then potato should be spelled GHOUGHPHTHEIGHTTEEAU. Dorren isn't wrong. English spelling is just so horribly inconsistent. It may not look as strange as Welsh or Polish, but believe me, it's a lot worse. There's really no guessing with English. Alright, now for something a little more intensive. How about we explore the roots of the word Jupiter? As English speakers from the 21st century, the first thing that comes to mind for most people would be the gas giant. Think a bit more though, and anyone who remembers the Roman mythology will know that Jupiter was the Roman adaptation of the Greek god Zeus. However, his name isn't really Jupiter, it was Jupiter. Zeus wasn't called Zeus either. He was called Zeus. Anyone that knows even a little bit of Latin can tell you that the Latin word for God is Deus. See the resemblance? It goes even further. An ancient Indian text called the Rig Veda mentions a god called Dyaus, or Dyaus Pita. Aha! Now we not only have Zeus, Dyaus, and Deus, but also Dyaus Pita and Jupiter. There's clearly a resemblance. We can now conclude that the first half of Jupiter is related to Zeus and the rest. But what about Peter and Pita? Okay, well, according to Grimm's law, which we looked at before, pa should shift to fa. Then the ta should shift to tha, which then shifts to the or the. So then we get the word feather. That sounds pretty close to father. To back that up, the Latin word for father is pater. I think we may be done. It's clear that something along the lines of Deus was the P.I.E. word for God and or sky, and pater was the word for father, with Jupiter being the father of the sky or the father of the gods. Now we can conclude that Deus Pater shifted to Jupiter to Jupiter over time. Now that you have a bit of a feel for P.I.E., care to take a guess at what known language is the closest relative to this ancient tongue? Okay, time's up. If you guessed English, or any Germanic language for that matter, I'm sorry, but you're very wrong. We've observed how Grimm's law and Werner's law have drastically changed the consonants of P.I.E. over time. If you guessed Sanskrit, Greek, or Latin, good job. They're pretty close, especially Sanskrit, although no one speaks that anymore. The real answer? Lithuanian. Yep. The Baltic languages, Lithuanian and Latvian, are the closest known languages to Proto Indo-European. Well, I hope you enjoyed learning more about the fantastic world of Indo-European languages. Maybe it'll help you someday. Say you're trying to learn another language, or maybe you can't understand a big sciencey word. Just remember, if it has European roots, it's probably related to English in some way or another. Or you could just Google it, who am I to judge?